the leadership community in which you have to essentially choose between people and profit. If I talk to any CEO, if I talk to you about your team and I said, how much would you pay to have every single person on your team deeply care about the results that you're trying to achieve? I mean, you would pay a lot of money for that, right?
All the
and
money.
I ask CEOs of major corporations, okay, I'm giving you a choice. You have to cut 20% of your team right now. But the 80% that's left, they are going to deeply care about your results. Do you take the deal?
Noel.
Okay, I am so excited to be here with you, Jessica Kriegel. You are such an expert on culture, workplace culture, telling stories to build those brands. And I'm just so excited that you decided to be here today and share this with my audience. How are you doing today, Jessica?
I'm doing so well. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yes, you are absolutely amazing. So I'm going to start with the thing that I absolutely love about you. It was a TED Talk that you did, and it is completely, it's like going viral, and it is all about, I think the title of it, I have it written here, is how to get people to give about what you're talking about. And so I absolutely love that title. It made me click, and I just thought you were amazing. So let's talk about how does one get people to give a crap about what we're talking about and connect to, you know, our products and our services and what we're trying to do in our companies?
It's such a good question. And if we could manage how to get people to give a crap, then wouldn't we be able to be unstoppable?
Yes.
And that's kind of the goal, right?
Yeah.
Well, here's what not to do. And what most people do is they have a goal. They want some, you know, it's a key result that they are focused on. And that result comes from action, people doing stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's where most of the thinking ends. Well, we just got to focus on getting people to do stuff. And if they do stuff, we'll get the goal. Yeah. So if you're trying to grow your subscribers, you're like, please subscribe. Take an action and you'll get the result, right?
Yeah.
But what ultimately, that we call that the action trap. That doesn't work long term. You get stuck in the sort of rat race of activity that can burn us out and doesn't work. What does work is understanding what gets people to take action. What is it that motivates us to move? And the thing that motivates us is the beliefs that we hold about work, about that YouTube channel, about whatever it is that you're trying to create movement within.
Yeah.
So really that's where you have to start, is understanding the beliefs that the people you are trying to motivate currently hold, and understand what those beliefs need to be in order for them to proactively take the action you're hoping that they will take so that you can get the result. And the way you transform beliefs is with the experiences that you create for them. So we all have millions of experiences every year. Yeah. And those experiences shape our beliefs about what's important to us, about where we want to spend our time. And that is how you ultimately get people to give a crap. You create experiences that will shape the right belief.
Yeah, I actually really connected to the TED Talk. Okay. So because one of the things that why I feel like I've been able to grab lots of subscribers on YouTube is kind of like you said, getting people to care. And so I jokingly say, you can't know Noel Randall without, you know, for 5 minutes without me telling you that I used to be broke and living in my parents' basement. You know, I was broke, I was bankrupt, I had bad credit. Today I'm a multimillionaire. And it's because, you know, I just started taking classes and learning, et cetera, et cetera. And so people just love that true story about myself. And, you know, it took me time to kind of feel comfortable telling people, because, you know, that was such an embarrassing time for me. But it was one of the things that people connected to me. They loved me. It actually helps me sell houses. It helps me, you know, flip houses. I've been able to connect to so many people telling my real story. And in your TED Talk, you gave this amazing example of at this hospital, they needed to start checking something. You know, I forget exactly what it was, but they needed to check this vital stat of a person. And how they got people to do it is by telling a story about someone who died essentially or was harmed because they didn't check this thing. And it was an amazing way to get all of the people at the hospital to, you know, check that vital stat. But in business, I always tell people, you should tell your story in order to connect to your audience. It's, you know, telling your vulnerability, not just your credibility. It really brings people in and it connects people to you. And that's how I've been able to get so many subscribers and really grow my business. So what else, what when you say kind of the experiences, you know, that you have, my mentor taught me about telling about a bad experience that led you to this great thing. Like, kind of talk through about how do companies and different cultures create an entire culture around their company's story, or, their experiences, and kind of what some of the benefits of doing that.
Well, it's the most powerful experience that you can create for someone is in a story that you tell. That's why you have a compelling story that resonates with people. It gets them to care, and it gets them to take an action, which gets you a result. For me, I am a keynote speaker. I go on stages at conferences and I tell stories.
Yeah.
And I hope to shape a new belief in the audience members so that they will lead a new way, right?
Yeah.
But there's other types of experiences that we can create. Some intentional experiences that leaders in business can lean into is recognition and feedback, right? When someone does something that is really aligned with the beliefs you want to see and driving results, identify that action, recognize for them, and tie explicitly that action to the belief that they're demonstrating and the result that they're going to get. Same thing with feedback. You can give positive feedback. You did this, and this is how it tied to the belief and how it's going to drive a result. But here's how you could have demonstrated that belief even more. Okay. Constructive feedback can also be an experience that helps me understand how what I'm doing will help get a result, which gets people to care more.
Yeah.
And sometimes, though, you alluded to this, experiences can be created that are unintentional.
Yeah.
Unintentionally bad, or experiences that aren't necessarily a direct communication, but something happens, a layoff, for example, right? And if that's the case, now you have to interpret those experiences. So interpreting experiences is a very powerful tool that leaders have in order to be able to shape the way people think about what they're experiencing at work as well.
Let's delve into that a little bit more, because you are, again, the workplace culture expert. I mean, you are just kind of in a lane all your own, which I absolutely love. And I tell people, create your own lane, don't compete. So I absolutely just hooked onto you with that whole thing with the workplace culture expert. And so talking about the experiences and then the feedback, because that was one of the things, again, that you always are kind of mentioning, is getting that feedback and recognizing when someone in your company does do, something kind of in line with what you're wanting. So go into a little bit more detail. How can a leader really use this to their advantage, and what are some of the benefits that they'll see if they do it?
Okay, so we have a 3-2-1 methodology, and that is the number of times that a leader should be employing these tools every week.
Okay.
So ask for feedback 3 times a week. So if you are asking for feedback, you're creating a feedback culture. Don't just go around start giving everyone feedback, right? That's not going to necessarily create a positive experience.
Right.
However, if you ask for feedback 3 times a week, then you can also give feedback sometimes, because you've demonstrated that this is something that you value and that you're open to.
Okay.
Then recognize people twice a week. Do that 2 times a week. You need to find someone to recognize for work that they've done, and then tell one powerful story every week. It could be on a town hall, on a team call, in a conversation, but do those 3 things. 3 pieces of feedback, 2 recognitions, and 1 story every week. Then find opportunities to interpret experiences. So there's different types of experiences, right? There's the type of experience that needs absolutely no interpretation because it is obviously so positive. I remember when I was interviewing at Google, they used to give out envelopes of cash at Christmas time as a bonus, right? To thank their workers. That doesn't need an explanation. I got it. You gave me cash. It's Christmas. I'm in, right? Right. But then there can be really negative experiences that no matter how much interpretation are always going to be viewed negatively. So you have 20% of your company is laid off. It doesn't matter what your intention is around that. People are going to experience that negatively. But then there's those in-betweens, which is where really powerful leadership can make a difference. The in-between is a moment in which someone is in a bad mood. They go into a meeting, and that scowl on their face is interpreted as something personal.
Yeah.
And now you've created conflict, right? And sometimes you don't even know that that negative experience has been created.
Yeah.
And that's where you then are viewed as a bad leader because, you know, maybe you got into a fight with your husband, you're talking about divorce, and now you're going to work and you're not able to hide that. And suddenly you're a bad leader, right? Because we make assumptions about each other all the time. So here's a simple conversation framework that I recommend people use to overcome those in-between moments. So I had this moment, for example, on a leadership call with an executive that was a peer of mine. I was presenting an idea and he was asking me like 10,000 questions and nitpicking my project, and it really felt like he was attacking my idea and not on board whatsoever, and I felt annoyed. So after the call, I called him up and I said, "So Eric, the experience I had on that call was that you were hitting me with a barrage of difficult questions." Okay. And then I get it really explicit about it. I said, that led me to the belief, because experiences shape beliefs. It led me to the belief that you don't like my idea and that you're trying to find holes in my solution.
Right.
Is that the belief you would like me to hold? And now I've kind of decoupled Eric from me in that moment in my experience, right? I'm just saying, like, you had this activity. I experienced it this way and held that belief. Is that right? And then what he did say, this is a true story.
He said, "Oh my God, no, I'm so bought into that idea. I love it, but I'm a real detail-oriented person. And so I'm trying to find all the ways in which we can make sure this doesn't fail." That's the belief I want you to hold. And then this is the thing he said that was really powerful. Then he said, "What experience can I create for you so that you will hold that belief?"
Smart
Isn't
leader.
that amazing?
Smart leader.
Yeah. And so now I can be really, it's just intentional culture creation rather than making stuff up and then going and complaining to my spouse about how Eric is trying to throw me under the bus, right? I can say, well, it would be great if you could write an email to this team talking about why you think this is a great idea because I'm having trouble getting their buy-in. And he said, absolutely, I'm happy to do it. And now we are creating experiences and beliefs intentionally to drive results. That's the power of culture when you're doing it with purpose.
Yeah. So let's talk about that because you brought up a great point that kind of got into me to two different things. For one, I actually a couple of years ago, just being 100% transparent and vulnerable here, maybe about 2 years ago in my company. Yeah, it was a little over 2 years ago now. I had almost like this coup where like 5 people like quit all at the same time, all from the same department. And there was just this manager and this leader that they absolutely just did not like and just kind of all left. And so that leads me to a question that I had, again, my personal experience of what I could have done to create a better culture. You know, obviously I'm learning some things and, you know, we're all works in progress, but we're at this time where it seems like employee dissatisfaction is at an all-time high. It seems like a lot of people just don't seem very in love with their companies. And I don't know if it just really seems like, you know, you have quiet quitting, you have, you know, I don't want to go back to the office, you know, you have the remote hybrid, you know, thing that companies are trying. So what do you think is going on as like a culture expert that we can really change this shift? How can we change this trend where people do want to work for us and they do enjoy the company and they don't want to just quiet quit and, you know, and all of these negative, you know, ramifications for companies? What can you give us advice there or guidance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is this false narrative in the leadership community in which you have to essentially choose between people and profit, right? That the two are at odds. And so you can either have, you know, investment in people and you do all sorts of perks and benefits and you give employees everything that they want, or you can have profitability. But those two things, and based on the economic cycle that you're in, you can spend a little bit more on people because profitability is so high that you can. And then if the economic cycle is bad, then you just really have to divest in people. You do layoffs, you slash and burn training budgets and career development, and profitability will be better. That's totally fake, because if I talk to any CEO, if I talk to you about your team and I said, how much would you pay to have every single person on your team deeply care about the results that you're trying to achieve? I mean, you would pay a lot of money for that, right?
Yes.
And I ask CEOs of major corporations, okay, I'm giving you a choice. You have to cut 20% of your team right now, so you have a lot less resources than you currently do. But the 80% that's left, they are going to deeply care about your results. Do you take the deal? And all of them say yes.
Yeah.
Every single person is like, oh, if I only had 80%, but those 80% cared, I would be able to drive better results.
Right.
So, and now flip the script.
Yeah.
Think about the best job you ever had. Maybe it's this right now, but think about the best, most fulfilled you ever felt in your work.
Okay.
The thing that probably defined that was that you really cared.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so there's the sweet spot where people and profitability both win.
Yeah.
Profitability wins when people care. Employees win when they care. And so that's what we need to create. Now, the hard part is figuring out how do you create that environment?
Right.
And it is the onus of the leader to understand that you can't only focus on what's urgent. Sometimes you have to focus on what's important. And what's important is understanding where there is that checked outedness, right? And that requires listening. It requires focus groups. It requires, if you're a large organization, engagement surveys. It requires working the floor. I just saw a LinkedIn post that the CEO of Lyft does Lyft rides every weekend. Right? Or maybe not every weekend, but he did this particular weekend and he took a picture of it. So maybe it's a PR thing, maybe it's real, but he is trying to experience what the frontline worker experiences.
Right.
The former CEO of Foot Locker would spend every weekend at a different Foot Locker.
Right.
And he would be on the floor in doing inventory.
Right.
He would order digital packages on the digital marketplace. And then he would look at how that gets fulfilled in the stores, in the back room. And that kind of understanding is really imperative, and a lot of CEOs fail to do it, especially of large organizations, because they have the belief that, well, it's too many people, it's too hard to do, so I'm not going to do it at all.
Yeah.
They don't even try to start to chip away at understanding the lived experience of the people in the company, and that is a problem. Interesting statistic from Great Place to Work, which looked at the companies that were most likely to thrive through a recession. The leading indicator of what made that company more likely before the recession even started was the positive employee experience of primarily marginalized employees. Because if you're primarily, if the marginalized employees are having positive experiences, then that means that the non-marginalized employees are likely having positive experience as well. And you've gone deep enough into the organization to create the experience that will allow for the kind of adaptability and agility that employees need to think and act into a recession.
Gotcha.
Right? So the data science proves that this is the case. And yet people still think of it as this like touchy-feely idea that's not going to drive results. And then they get focused on strategic planning as if that's the key. You know, the key is listening at its most basic form.
Yeah. So, okay. So I come from corporate America. So at the top of height of my career, I was a vice president at JP Chase. Okay. And had, a few hundred employees between, obviously not direct employees, but indirects, and then, directs, managers, and then they have team leaders and managers under them. And it was often overwhelming keeping up with even just a couple hundred people, you know what I mean, what their satisfaction levels were. And Chase, to me, honestly, for a big corporation, and again, I have no affiliation, no being paid, they actually did a really good job, I felt like, as with the banks. Because again, I work for Bank of America, I work for Wells Fargo. And to me, Chase Bank was probably at the time one of the best. Okay. And this was like 2012 or whatever. So I feel like they would do a lot of check-ins, where they would send those employee satisfaction surveys, where we do, as managers, as vice president, we did have to check in on our employees, and it kind of mandated a lot of that stuff. But at other companies, I will see them try those exact same tactics, and they just don't resonate. What makes that, like, where I'm asking and the employee takes it as a genuine thing versus at another company, we ask for employee satisfaction and how you're doing, and you get this, you're just doing this to check a box. They just don't almost feel like you care. How do you make the employees think that this is something important and not just something you're doing as a company or as a leader to check the box? Because some people
I've done a lot. I've done a lot of culture assessments and I've seen both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it boils down to the belief that employees have about the motivation for the survey. And I've worked at companies where they believe that it wasn't anonymous and it was a trap. I've worked at companies where they believed it was a way to measure
why is it that
management.
some people think that it's a trap and it's
totally.
Yeah. And they're not, or they won't do it. And you have these low fill out rates, or, you know, again, I don't know the exact term, but very few of them fill it out percentage wise versus. Yeah.
Or I've also worked with companies who they're apathetic about it because they don't think that any action will be taken because they've taken 1,000 of these before and nothing changes.
Yeah.
Or that they won't be honest about the results. I worked with one technology company that did a massive survey. They had really high response rates, 94% of the company. And this was an organization with over 100,000 employees.
Yeah.
And then the number one feedback that came back just overwhelmingly in the comments and in all the survey responses was that compensation was not competitive. And when the HR team presented it to the CEO said, great, take out anything about compensation and share the rest of it, and we'll create some task forces around that. Now, when the presentation to the company was made about, thanks for filling out the survey, here's what you said, and there was nothing in the presentation about compensation, it was so obviously inauthentic.
Right.
And people were apathetic about participating anymore because they just knew it was such a glaring problem.
Yeah.
And to act like that didn't come out in the survey was so obvious. And that's another problem that leaders have today. And it's an experience that is created is they are so attached to these scrubbed corporate communications that the thing that they communicate, they think they can actually control the narrative in some way. So they'll only say what they want people to believe in an attempt to get that to be the story. When the reality is, information sharing is so multi-directional now. We get it from social media. We get it from anonymous job posting boards like Glassdoor or Blind, and we get it from back channeling each other. Everyone's talking about their salary now. I mean, we can now understand there's so much more visibility into the inner workings of an organization's decision-making process. But CEOs are still talking as if everyone will believe what they say if they just say it this way, right? And it's silly. Like one of the examples I can give you from today's news, who was it? A corporation just decided they're not going to invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion anymore. Oh, Lowe's.
Yes.
Lowe's is no longer going to invest in any LGBTQ events. They're not going to have any of their employee resource groups. They're not doing any DEI stuff anymore. And the reason that they put for why they're divesting in those projects is, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Because they want to make sure everyone feels included.
That's funny.
They want inclusion.
Right.
Inclusion sounds good. Let's make inclusion be the thing.
Yeah.
Inclusion is why we're divesting in inclusion.
Yeah.
It's like completely insane. Like what if the CEO actually told the truth? Which is, we've been seeing a lot of companies getting pushback from consumers about DEI because of, go woke, go broke.
Right.
And so we're worried that we're going to lose customers and sales will suffer. So we're going to divest in that too. Like that would be refreshingly honest, at least.
I mean, Jessica, I would just be so inauthentic. I am an African-American female. Let's talk about DEI for just a second. And we don't have to get political or anything like that. But obviously, like I said, I used to work in corporate America. Obviously, I do not anymore. I have my own thing. And when I worked at Chase, and again, this was in 2011, 2012, there was a DEI person there. And that was already a part of Chase's thing, and and it's funny you said that, because if I told you I worked at Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Chase Bank, those are the three largest banks in the United States. And I had management positions at all of them. And if I tell you Chase was the best, and they had that back then, but it wasn't necessarily the way, it wasn't advertised, I guess, or promoted how it has been in maybe the past 3 or 4 years. And so it never had this negative impact. But obviously I was an African-American vice president, and there was this this effort that they had made. Obviously, they pulled me from Bank of America to their company to have more females and more women of color, and again, not just African American. They're Indian and Jewish or whatever. You get what I'm saying? Not just this one specific thing. And so now it's so funny because you hear so much about DEI. Good. I hear these great stats that if a company has a lot more diversity, if there's this equity, that company will do well. And then on the other hand, you have all this publicity that says, you like you said, you go woke, you go broke. It's costly, it's expensive, it doesn't work. It's it's reverse discrimination, and I would obviously assume that there's rights on both sides, but if we're talking about workplace culture and making the most profitable but culturally one of the best companies where we have employee retention and we have company, people that stay, because obviously attrition is very expensive. What is the true story behind DEI? What's your opinion? Is it worth it or is it not?
Great question. Well, I actually did research on this at Culture Partners, and it's been done thousands of times before our research as well. I was validating what was already clearly proven to be true, which is that diversity and inclusion drive business results. Just point blank. We don't have to discuss it. I could cite 20 studies that show that if you want financial movement and growth for your company, you will get more of that if you have more diversity and more inclusion in your company. Now, equity is interesting because equity, we don't know what we're talking about when we talk about equity, right? So many people see different definitions of equity. It's like one of those words like culture. Do you have a great culture? What the hell does that mean? Like culture is what? It feels touchy-feely to some. It's very results-oriented to others. People think ping pong tables and kombucha in the break room, and other people think it's the values, norms, beliefs, behaviors. It's the iceberg. It eats breakfast for, strategy. I mean, it's just these words, when they are confused, are a lot harder to measure and prove to be true. But diversity and inclusion are not confusing. And those two things definitely drive business results. Now, they drive business results when they are actually happening. They don't drive business results when you've got some performative campaign around we care about diversity and it's really for show, right?
Great point.
Yeah, so that's what a lot of companies did, frankly. George Floyd happened and they thought, oh no, we're going to get in trouble if we don't have diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of our plan. The fastest growing job title the year after George Floyd was head of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I worked with a large technology company that hired a DEI leader, very talented woman. She joined the company and her first job was to convince everyone in the company that she should have a budget. She spent a year trying to get a budget because the CEO hired her and said, you go around and find lines of business leaders who are willing to give you a cut of their budget so you can do work. We're not going to fund this.
That is awful.
So she did. She spent that year. She found 6 leaders out of, call it 25-ish, that were all in on diversity, equity, and inclusion. They were all white men that bought into it, not because that's just interesting, right? These were, but that's because most of the leaders were white men. So that was kind of the pool that she had to choose from. And she got a starting budget. And then she started small within those teams, got results. And then other people started to buy in. And now she's still there years later. She now has a large budget and she's working at a global level. But the CEO did not hire her because he cared. The CEO hired her so that he could point to the head of diversity and say, we care about Black people. And so that doesn't drive results. Having a head of diversity doesn't drive results. Actually having diversity does. Now, I just interviewed a CEO for my podcast who I asked this question to because another person I interviewed is Johnny C. Taylor, who's the CEO of SHRM. And they just announced that they're moving away from DEI and towards I&D. They're saying equity is too confusing. Let's lean into what we know works. We can get buy-in from both sides on inclusion and diversity. Everyone cares about inclusion. Even the CEO of Lowe's, according to his press release, right? He says inclusion matters. So let's start there. Once we get that win, we can graduate. Well, this CEO of it's like a cybersecurity company. I asked him about this and he's a white guy. And I said, what do you guys think about DEI? And he said, we have always cared deeply about that, but we don't pay attention to any acronyms. We're not someone who's out here writing press releases about what we've done here. We're people who care about this in order to drive results. And so that's the answer. It's real when it's real. It doesn't work when it's performative.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And like I said, with the using, just going back to that example of Chase with the diversity and inclusion. So one of the things that I think I liked about it, that it was not just about us hiring diverse people. That was not her role. Just, that we have this percentage of this and this percentage of this. It really took it to what Chase does, which is what? They're a bank. So lending in underrepresented areas, having programs that teach, this community about the bank, having, investing in projects for housing or commercial buildings or whatever in these areas. And again, and focusing on, maybe entrepreneurs of color, for example, or entrepreneurs of women, and having some specific programs and projects and events to bring them in and let them know what Chase could partner with them, whether it be through loans, whether it be through checking account, whether it be through, those different relationships that they have. And to me, that seemed genuine. Like you said, it wasn't this, let's check a box and get more of these people hired per se. And I think so much of it people have is around who they hire. Do you think DEI is all about the workforce per se, or am I, you like the idea where it's more about what the company does, you know what I mean? The services and the products that they offer are diverse and inclusive and in trying to bring in different groups. Or do you really think the focus should be just on the workforce being diverse and inclusive, et cetera?
Well, so many studies have shown that the employee experience affects the customer experience. And so maybe it starts with the workforce, right? But ultimately, the workforce, why does diversity drive results? Because when you have greater diversity of thinking and perspective in the decision makers at your company, they are going to more broadly reflect the consumers and understand the needs of the people who are buying your product and make decisions accordingly, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just about the workforce. It is ultimately about the customer experience that you're creating that diversity helps to enable.
Yeah.
They're all connected, right? I mean, that is why we need people. I mean, you saw with ChatGPT and these AI LLMs that have come out, they have a bias within them because those biases reflect the people who are developing them. And that became very obvious in the responses that some of these AI bots are spouting out
right.
responses, right?
Where it's like, show me a poor person, show me a rich person,
right.
Show me a productive person, show me a non-productive person. You're right. It was very, very obvious what the bias was with just some of those really ambiguous terms. And so, you're absolutely correct. I think one of the biggest benefits, like you said, is those different perspectives. And again, I don't think it's anti-white male or anti-majority or anything like that. I definitely think, those opinions and those perspectives are key. And most of the success of any business would not exist, I'm just using my business, for example, without a male white perspective. You know what I mean? There's so many, because again, historically speaking, if this is who has been successful in business, they're going to have some great guidance for me. And so I couldn't possibly say, no, I just want to have a company that all looks like Noel. That's probably not that you probably wouldn't think that I would make a lot of money. And that's not how my company is designed either. So I definitely think it goes both ways. And I don't think that people understand that there will be more founders of different races and sexes and sexual orientations, and they too need to have diverse employees and workforces. So I don't think there's a negative to it that people see, because I think what's also brought into it is the diverse entrepreneur and the diverse founders.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I was a part of a leadership program early in my career, maybe 15 years ago, that was originally created by a Black male CEO. And his goal was to diversify the rooms of leadership in the community, right? He looked around. He was the only Black board member in any room that he was ever in.
Right.
And everyone would call him to be on their board because he was the only Black CEO around. And they thought, well, we need a Black person. Let's call him, right? And he said, this is silly. Let me get the next generation of leaders to develop so that they can be in the boardroom. And when he started the program, he only admitted Black students. And they did a year of that. And I think the second year was also like that. And after 2 years, they realized, you know what, if we're talking about diversifying the boardroom, we need to be diverse ourselves.
Right.
Because it became a sort of echo chamber that they created for themselves around so then they opened it up. And what the leader of that program said is, one day, I hope this program is so incredible that white men are banging on the door trying to get in, you know? And the year that I got was the year that they admitted their first white man to the program. And it created such rich discussion because it was a safe place in this leadership development program to talk about things that are very scary to talk about. And that is important for leaders to be able to explore that. And we can't do that in corporations oftentimes because, like, back to the scrubbed corporate comms idea, it's all about liability avoidance. I can't say the wrong thing. And therefore, I'm just not going to say anything. And that keeps everything. That is what kills inclusion, right? When you can't talk about what it is that's really going on. So really interesting challenges to address this problem. What we know works is inclusion, and what we know works is diversity. And so leaning into those things is a surefire bet. And this go woke, go broke campaign is totally silly because, I mean, Harley Davidson also divested in their DEI programs and talked about, you know, this is why. And there's a whole bunch of articles that have been written about how Harley Davidson went woke and therefore went broke. But the fact is, their stock price, I think it was like 80, it went down to 40 before George Floyd. And it's been at 40 ever since. So the go woke had nothing to do with them going broke.
With it.
You know?
I love that you're a researcher and that you have the stats. That's, again, another thing that I absolutely loved about you, Jessica. Like, you are a researcher and you have all of these great stats. And because, again, it's not just about a feeling or an opinion. I have an MBA from Baylor University, and that was one of the things that we learned. Literally, we had an entire class, and it talked about how you want a heterogeneous, workforce and different people, and also your customer base. You don't want just your customers to be this one small demographic, because just year over year, the growth of the company is not going to be sustainable. You really do need to be able to reach out and sell your products and services to a very different population than just what you and your company looks like or the founder looks like. So I don't think people really realize that they're missing out, like you said, on profits, on money, and that there is more profits in diversity. But I love the point that you made about equity, because I think let's talk about that, because you said something really quickly. You kind of made a quick point about it. You said there was the company, they did the survey, and everybody talked about compensation. And so we all know how much we get paid at a job in our position is one of the things that drives if an employee is happy. And they're, obviously with the pay discrepancies, or this person gets paid more than me, that can drive a lot of dissatisfaction and a lot of what people don't feel is equitable. But do you feel like there is a way to get to equity in pay?
Yes. So again, though, there are multiple definitions of pay equity out there. And so we have to say what we mean by pay equity. So there's a very commonly shared cartoon on social media right now that tries to define equity, and it has these three people standing behind a fence, trying to look over the fence at some activity happening behind the fence, and they're different heights. And they say, this is equality. Everyone's standing on the ground. The shorter person cannot see over the fence. The medium person can barely see over the fence, and the tall person can see over the fence. And then on the other side of the cartoon, they're all standing on boxes of different sizes. So now they have equal height, so they can all look over the fence, but the shortest person has the largest box that they're standing on, and so on and so forth, right? And they say that's equity. So that cartoon is getting shared all over the place to define equity. And that is how a lot of people think of equity, that, well, because this person grew up with an underprivileged background and they don't have as good of an education and they didn't have as good of a network and they didn't have exposure to as much, then therefore we need to give give them more handouts in order to get them equal to the rest of the people who, went to Harvard Business School and had rich parents and were introduced to the CEO of the company to get the job. That way, everything is equitable, right? And that's not what we mean, but that is what people think about pay equity.
Yeah.
And so that's what there's so much pushback against equity because of the way that people are thinking about equity.
Yeah.
What I think of when I think of pay equity is equal work, equal pay, right? So you are doing this amount of work, you have this much experience, you have these results, you're getting paid the same as someone else. And that doesn't exist yet, right? There is still people doing the same work with the same experience, but they're not getting paid as much. And that is something that needs to be overcome. So just understanding what we mean by equity is step one. And then can we get to pay equity? Absolutely. And there are a ton of companies that have. It's a simple math equation, right? Hootsuite is one company that is very passionate about this. They did an analysis and they have achieved pay equity across the board in their company.
Okay.
It's not complicated. It's a choice, right? But many, many companies, technology companies in particular, don't. And that's because the way that decisions get made is inherently biased many of the time.
Yeah.
To give you an investment bank.
Pay, as a company, and again, this is just me, Noelle Randall's opinion. I think that for pay is, and again, this is from my training, and I just almost feel bad saying this because I'm like giving all these qualifiers, but it's like you're trying to pay the person as little as possible to get them to take the job. Just quite frankly, I feel like that was my job, when I was a manager, trying to what's the lowest they'll take, that we have a range of what we could pay. And if we thought the person would take the bottom of the range, that's what we offered them. And then some people would counter. And many times the women, just using that as an example, most of the time the women didn't counter offer. And a lot of times the men did. And they ended up with just a 30-second saying, hey, can you go to 100? Just using that as a round number. Say we offer them 80 and then they offer 100. We'd meet them in the halfway at 90. And so the woman got the 80 and he got the 90 just by asking, if you get what I'm saying, just using that as an example.
Yeah.
I saw that all the time. And so I feel like with pay equity, why I think it's just so hard is because of the motivation of the company isn't to pay you the most.
No, capitalism is not about helping the frontline worker get the most.
I was saying that, Jessica. I was just like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, there are leaders who choose to act differently. My boss is one of them. I can tell you a story about when I sold my business to Culture Partners, which is where I'm now the chief scientist. And when I was negotiating the sale of the business, there's that awkward moment where someone has to say a number first, right? And my boss said a number first because I learned the rule, never say the number first.
Right.
So my boss said the number first, but I had a number in my head. Let's just use funny money examples. Let's say I was expecting, $6.
Yeah.
Well, he said $3.
Right.
And I was disappointed, clearly.
Right.
And so I had to come back to him with a response, and I felt now suddenly awkward about wanting 6 because he was so far off of 6, right?
Right.
So what I said was, well, I would have been happy with anywhere between $5.50 and $6, right? And so I kind of came down a little bit just to not seem completely insane, but really what I wanted was 6.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, great, let's give you 6. Now, I said I would have been happy with $5.50. He could have said $5.50.
Right.
And he probably could have said 4, right? And I would have been fine with that. But he went to the top of my range.
Yeah.
Instantly. And why? I asked him about it later, and he said, because I wanted you to know that I was all in on you, and I wanted you to come all in on us.
Wow.
And if I had given you $5.50, I knew you would have said yes, but you probably would have had a bad taste in your mouth. Going back to where we started this conversation, it would have created an experience that led to a belief that he's not really all in on me.
Right.
Right? And so he wanted to create a different experience. It's intentional. And later he interpreted the experience for me. So that's really powerful decision making. And, did the company lose 50 cents? Yes, the company did lose 50 cents. But did it gain 50% more discretionary effort from me? Absolutely.
Right.
And how much is that worth?
I agree. I agree. I definitely agree. And there is something to that, obviously, from both sides, I can say, you know what I mean? It's just so funny because, again, I feel like I was raised in corporate America, and some of the most in banking of all things. So just really like numbers, see if you could get them, for the lowest number. And so it always seems so counter to culture, if you get what I'm saying, to culture, because in some cases you can have the foosball table and the ping pong table, like you said, and all of these great things that they love. But if their compensation is not what they wanted, it's really hard to keep them happy. All right. So let's go to the next thing that I wanted to, before we end our conversation, because you just have so much. And I had so many great questions for you because you are just amazing. Let's talk about the remote, everybody wanting to work remote now. And how do we keep culture intact? There's been companies, like I said, I know that I worked for it. I never got to work remote. We had to work in the office when I did work. But again, I haven't worked for another company since, 2017, 2018. So it was before COVID, you know what I mean? So now that we're after COVID and, I didn't work in corporate America during COVID, I noticed that since COVID, almost no one wants to go to an office. I literally had a real estate office that I now lease out to a salon because I didn't have enough agents and people that wanted to work in an office. And it almost just was this unnecessary expense. So there's so many companies, though, that have invested so much money on their culture and having these great workplaces and spaces for people to work and connect with one another. How does working remote translate?
Great question. So if culture is how people think and act, it means thinking creatively about how people think and act in a virtual environment. I still have to think and act at work every day, even though I'm working from home, right? I have to, and the experiences that I have still exist virtually. When my boss sends me a text message, that's an experience. When I get an email and it says, hey, how are you? How was your weekend? Or it just says, can you send me the file? That's an experience that leads to a belief. And so we still show up for each other virtually. What people think they're losing when they lose their culture is they've lost the ROI in all of those fun perks that they spent money on. The ping pong table is no longer getting you an ROI. It frankly never was, right? But you've spent all this money on the office and it feels like that's wasted because you're now working from home. And frankly, I think a lot of leaders are not taking accountability for results and using virtual work as a scapegoat for that. Google just said the reason that they're not doing well is because people worked from home. Yeah. Well, isn't that convenient to blame it on the employees? You wouldn't blame it on the managers who were poor at managing to outcomes, because most people, when they're working in the office, they're managing activity, the action trap that we talked about at the beginning, which is, have you done this? Get on it. Have you, what else have you done today? And that's not going to lead to results. But when you manage to outcomes, you can do that just as effectively in person as you can virtually. But I think leaders don't have that skill set because it was thrust upon them suddenly in a traumatic situation. And then they just want to go back to how it was. Now think of the language that we used about that. Return to office. Go back to work. It's all about backwards movement. But great business is about adaptation, evolving, and changing. And so we need to go forward, forward into the home environment and figure out how to operate there, because we all realized it was much more convenient to stay home.
Let's talk about that. How? Because I, like I said, I love you so much. I do. I just have not been able to get that same thing from my employees either. I too am an entrepreneur that says I'm not a great fan of people working at home. And I know that's like the thing that no one wants to hear, but I'm like, I hear dogs barking in the background. I hear your kids crying. I hear freaking the doorbell. I'm not...
Okay, so that's fair, because let's be clear. My bias, I like to work from home and I like to manage teams from home. Right. So
me too. And
but you like to work from home too?
Oh my gosh. That's why that's why I wanted this. And I have 5 kids and a dog, but I am just adamant that I should not, if you're working and you're on the clock, I should not hear your freaking kids and your dog and the this and the that and hear just So sorry, go ahead. I'll let you answer. How do we?
But that's funny because I thought what you were saying is you thrive in the workplace and you want to be there and you want your employees there too. But what you're saying is I want to work from home, but I want them to work in the office.
Yes, I'm being awful. I'm admitting that, Jessica. I'm totally admitting that. I don't think that most people have the discipline. If I'm being honest, you know what I mean? And maybe judgmental about it. I'm not seeing the discipline that I have. But again, I'm the entrepreneur. I'm the one that pays everybody's paycheck. So of course I have to have the discipline. And I just feel, I don't know, talk to me. Maybe you can convince me. Why?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And let's be clear, not every company, working from home doesn't work for every company or every person. Like my best friend hates working from home. Her whole company is 100% virtual, and she asked them to fund a co-working space that she could go to so that she can actually, and she lives alone. This isn't about avoiding the kids and the dog. She just likes to be in a different environment for work. So to each their own. I am agnostic about which wins. In my opinion, we can be just as effective in a workplace at home as we can in a workplace that's within the four walls of your headquarters. And here's how. You have to start with results always. What are the key results that you are trying to achieve, and what are the key results that your team has? Make them meaningful, measurable, and memorable. Break them down into timeframes that make sense for you. In my organization, we do it quarterly. At the beginning of every quarter, I sit down with my boss and I tell him the 3 meaningful, measurable, and memorable key results that I am going to achieve this quarter, so that I can look back at the quarter and say, that was a home run quarter. And I update him weekly on how those rocks are going. The rocks are what we call them, but also key results. And I say green, yellow, red. I'm green on track for this. I'm yellow on track for that. I'm red on track for that. And here's why. And we adjust. Sometimes those key results shift, but I'm asking for support. I'm letting him know I'm holding myself accountable with my boss towards those results. And he's helping me with figuring out how to turn yellows into greens, right? So that's outcome focused. What my boss never does is check how many hours I was logged in, or ask me how many calls I made today, or, I can take entire days off. Our top sales guy takes every Friday off. And my boss knows it. And he's like, why would I care? He's our top sales guy. If he wants to take every Thursday and Friday off, as long as he's getting the results, I'm fine with it. So it's all about outcome, not activity.
But what about these people that are using, I literally had to, and I say this, and it was awful because I had to let go one of my employees that I absolutely loved for using this app thing that makes it seem like they're clicking. And I saw this article where Wells Fargo had the same thing, where they had to lay off a bunch of people because their employees were faking productivity with these apps.
Yeah, but before they faked productivity, there was the decision to monitor their activity through that app.
True.
Right? So their culture of activity is the most important was created by the decision to monitor their clicks. My clicks aren't monitored. I could not turn on my computer for a week and my boss would not know. So that's because there's a culture of you manage your time, but I want to see results. And I do have to drive results, by the way. There's no sorry, everything is red. I didn't accomplish it. It doesn't fly. And I meet with my manager regularly. I mean, I talk to him every day, and we have a weekly leadership meeting. And so there's constant check-ins, but they really come from a place of, how are you driving results? And if not, what's going on? And we are a culture of accountability. People who don't drive results don't make it here because we are a small organization and we don't have room for a bunch of people who aren't able to deliver results. There's only 50 seats on our bus, we say. And so if 2 of those seats are being taken up by people who aren't doing the work we need them to do, we need to fill those seats with other people who will.
I like that. That's a great point, because quite frankly, the reason why we checked the person's productivity was because they weren't available, and they actually had another job that they could do, I guess, while they did our job. And so it truly was just things not getting done that actually made us check. So you actually are correct. But I definitely think where we could have helped with our culture was just more about the outcomes and saying, okay, these are the goals that we have set for you, and the outcomes that we're expecting and the results that we're expecting. And I think there is just going to be a shift in leadership and how the skill sets, because again, I'm saying this, and I got an MBA. They didn't teach me about managing a remote staff. That was never even a class. Or in virtual, managing virtually. That we did have stuff about overseas employees, in my program. And again, these are kind of like electives. We're managing, employees that are overseas and have different cultures than yours. We definitely had a lot of that because, again, lots of large corporations go to the Philippines and India and different things like that for, outsourcing their work. So I definitely think that there's going to be quite a bit of work to be done with the American worker and how we manage them remotely. And if we do you think we're going to embrace the remote employee, or do you really think it's going to be, nope, everybody get their butts back to the office?
Well, what the research shows is that the balance between office and home return to office dynamic, that's plateaued. So right now we're at about 30% of people working from home, to some degree. And it looks like that's where we are staying. I think as technology progresses and we get more comfortable with virtual offices, I think that will increase over time. But for now, it looks like we're kind of at a homeostasis for a little bit.
Okay. Good answer. Thank you so much, Jessica. So you have been just a wealth of knowledge, and you continue to be, and I absolutely love your stuff. You have an amazing YouTube channel. You have over 15,000 subscribers. So where can my audience reach out and follow you and learn more about all of this amazing information that you have?
Well, thanks for asking. I have a weekly newsletter called This Week in Culture on LinkedIn. You can follow me. I also have a daily podcast. It's every day, 5-minute episode called Culture Leaders Daily, and it's all about what's happening today in the world of culture. And you can go to my website, which is jessicakriegel.com.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to make sure I get on that podcast. Like I said, I saw your stuff on YouTube and I've seen your things on LinkedIn. I did not know you have the daily podcast. So that is absolutely amazing. And again, 5 minutes. Who doesn't have time to get a little bit of culture information in 5 minutes? Because it really is important. So again, thank you so much, Jessica, for doing this interview and giving these great pieces of information so we can really change our cultures, our workplaces, our companies, and change the world, essentially, with what we're doing.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
Yes.